All right, so today, the book of Deuteronomy. We hear a lot about phobias these days, right? The word phobia actually comes from the Greek word for fear. The Greek word for fear is phobos, right? So we literally just take that and turn it into an English word, phobia. And so it's being afraid, having fear, or being terrified. And those are all things that we experience at various points in life. In fact, I used to love staying up at night, late at night, after my parents had gone to bed, and I had some edition, probably like, I want to say it was like the 1994 edition of the Guinness Book of World Records, right? And I would just read that thing from cover to cover and read about all these crazy things. But I remember distinctly one night, I became utterly convinced as a 9 or 10-year-old boy reading the Guinness Book of World Records, utterly convinced that I was going to die one day because I was going to be shot or bitten. I don't know what they would do by the blue dart poisonous tree frog. It's the most poisonous frog in the world, right? And man, I don't know what it was late at night, quiet house, reading by probably flashlight underneath my covers and seeing that little frog and thinking, that thing's so small. It could be like outside. I'm walking to the car one day and bam, and it's like, the internet didn't exist, right? So, I mean, I couldn't just go look up. They live nowhere near me, right? But I remember just being consumed with that fear. I've grown out of that. You'll be glad to know. For some people, it's spiders or snakes or mice or animals or heights or public speaking. For other people, it's things in nature like maybe lightning, tsunamis, tornadoes. You heard the sirens go off last night. Maybe that caused fear inside of you. But have you ever really thought about the phenomenon? Maybe, I don't know what the phobia would be. We could ask ChatGPT, I guess. But like what the phobia would be called for a fear of sinkholes. Have y'all thought about this terrifying natural reality known as a sinkhole? Let's just think about it for a second, right? A sinkhole is literally a hole that opens up in the earth at any given moment in time. Someone parks their car outside and they come out the next morning to this, right? They see that the asphalt's caved in and the car is now deep in the earth, and they're thinking, how am I going to explain this to my wife, right? Or my insurance agent, right? Does this fall under acts of God and it's not covered? Things like that. I mean, it's horrifying. But while it seems random and spontaneous, right, we know now the natural processes that lead to a sinkhole, right? A sinkhole appears, this is one of the largest sinkholes in the world right here, utterly horrifying. A sinkhole appears after a process of underground erosion over a period of time. Water starts moving, and before anybody knows it, the packed dirt, rock, and mud that fortifies the ground that we walk on gives way, and all of a sudden, boom, right? This sinkhole opens up. So have a great day. We're going to wrap things up. Y'all just walk carefully. There's a lot of rain out there. I'm just kidding. And so the people of Israel had gone from Egypt. They'd been gone for Egypt for over a year, right? After the book of Exodus and Leviticus. And then we get to Numbers, and there had been multiple complaints against Moses, the food, against God. There had been complaints about all different things that they had experienced. And so literally, when they sent the 12 spies to the land of Canaan, which was the promised land, and those 12 spies came back, and 10 of those spies expressed that they would be crazy to go forward into what God had for them. It was like a moral sinkhole opened up underneath that generation of adults in the land of Israel as they rejected God's plan to move into the promised land. All of those streams of doubt had eroded whatever little faith that they had, right? I mean, remember, they were at the base of the mountain, and Moses came down and said, God wants to strike a covenant with you. And they're like, let's go, right? I mean, when the waters parted and they're walking through the Red Sea, everybody's like, woohoo, this is great. They get to the other side. They see the Egyptian army wiped away. They're singing praises to God, right? And so that we've seen these mustard seeds of faith like planted in Israel over and over again, but we've seen the undercurrents of complaint also. And those have eroded that faith to the point to where this sinkhole opens up and this entire generation of adults is, in one sense, consumed. And they get this declaration in Numbers chapter 14, verse 33. And your children shall be shepherds in the wilderness 40 years. Not shepherds of sheep, but shepherds of their dying parents. They would suffer for their faithlessness until the last of your dead bodies lies in the wilderness. This generation, because of their idolatry, because of their lack of faith in God, they had seen they'd seen God move powerfully. They wouldn't go forward. And so God says, just stay right where you are. And so at the end of the book of Numbers, Israel is across the Jordan River now with this new generation. They're across the Jordan River, and this old man, Moses, he is watching this new generation, and he has that grandfatherly longing that as this younger generation is poised to go in and take the land, that they need to recognize the failure of Moses' generation. And so he sees the need to press the next generation towards faithfulness so that they don't repeat the process of faithlessness that their parents had. And so he gives us the parting words known as Deuteronomy. In the Hebrew Bible, this book is just called words, right? Just called words. And it comes from the first verse of the book. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 1. These are the words. So they said, it sounds like a good book title. Let's call it Words. And so it's called Words. And so Moses speaks in the 40th year on the first day of the 11th month since they left Egypt, and his desire is to repeat, explain, and expand upon all that the Lord had given him. We see that in verse 3, right? He expands on and repeats all that the Lord had given him. There's a really simple way that you can see Deuteronomy is divided into 3 parts. Chapters 1 through 11, Moses explains what God has done and how he has acted faithfully. God has acted faithfully. In light of that faithfulness, this younger generation needs to recognize the stewardship that they have and be more faithful than their parents were. So it's like his rally cry for a right response from this new generation. Then chapters 12 through 26, this is where the book gets its actual name, the second giving of the law, Deuteronomy. It's a combination of the Greek words for second or repeated law. And so in these chapters, Moses repeats the laws to them. He describes how they're to be focused on and devoted in their worship of the one true God, how their leaders should be people of character and integrity, and also how they should conduct themselves in marriage and in family and in business. And so remember God's purpose for Israel? We've hit on it every single week, that that they would be a people through whom the blessing of God and the presence of God was restored to God's fallen creation. And so one of the ways that this blessing would spread to the nations is how God tells Israel to treat the widows, the orphans, and the immigrants. And this past Wednesday, we addressed how this balances our understanding of Joshua's conquest that he's about to have on the land, right? They're about to go into the land, and we talked about last week. I said, if you've ever had interest in trying to understand the moral justification for all the bloodshed and all the things that you see in the book of Joshua in terms of the conquest of the land, then you can hear that. And we actually talked about that this past Wednesday. It's on the podcast, okay? And so what's clear is that the worship of God was the transformational center of Hebrew life. It was meant to cultivate their unique identity, that as the people worship, this is key, as the people worship God and as they followed His law, they would be on the cutting edge of justice in comparison to their ancient neighbors. And then in chapters 27 through 34, Moses calls the people to respond. He challenges them to follow it, and he calls them to respond, saying, if you do these things, everything's going to go great. You'll find life, you'll find blessing, you'll find joy. But if you don't do these things, you'll be cursed, afflicted, and ultimately exiled from this land that you're about to go into. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 19 says, I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore choose life, that you and your offspring may live. There was a researcher from Columbia University that found that the average person makes about 70 decisions every day. 70 decisions every day. So on average, you make around 70 decisions every day. That's 25,500 decisions a year. Over 70 years, that's 1,788,500 decisions. The philosopher, skeptic Albert Camus said, life is a sum of all your choices. You put all those 1,788,500 choices together, and he would say, that's who you are. C.S. Lewis put it a different way. Christian apologist C.S. Lewis put it a different way. He says, people often think of Christian morality as a kind of bargain in which God says, if you keep a lot of the rules, I'll reward you. And if you don't, I'll do that other thing. He says, I don't think that's the best way of looking at it. I would much rather say that every time you make a choice, so think about what you said about how many choices you make per day. Every time you make a choice, you are turning the central part of you, the part of you that chooses, into something a little different from what it was before. And taking your life as a whole, with all your innumerable choices, all your life long, you are slowly turning this central thing either into a heavenly creature or into a hellish creature. Either into a creature that is in harmony with God and with other creatures and with itself, or else into one that is in a state of war and hatred with God and with its fellow creatures and with itself. To be one kind of creature is heaven. That is joy and peace and knowledge and power. So as you choose every day, as you choose, you are becoming something. Remember how the sinkhole forms? If you're not walking with God, if you're not walking in integrity, if you're not walking in truth, if you're not walking in wisdom, some of your decisions, some of those choices that you're making are slowly chipping away at the ground underneath your feet. Before you know it, that next decision that goes against God's truth or goes against God's wisdom will result in a fall that takes you deeper than you want to go. But what about right choices? If bad choices strip away the ground underneath us, what's the impact of wise choices that focus on truth and integrity and faithfulness? This idea of choosing is at the heart of Deuteronomy. We said earlier that worship was the transformational center of Israel's life. The same is true for us. But what does that mean? It means that the first choice that we make is to orient ourselves to God in a way that declares, I surrender to you, you are worthy. And so, one of the central parts of Deuteronomy, some of you may have been surprised that I skipped over it, is this thing called the Shema. Everybody say Shema. That's kind of fun to say, isn't it? All right, say it again, Shema. All right, yeah. You're kind of all speaking in tongues. It's a known tongue, right? But and so Shema is what Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 and 5 is called in the Hebrew Bible. It's one of the core verses of the book. And so I want to take a few moments just to look at it to help us answer the question that we just asked. What does faithfulness look like? So Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 and 5 says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. If you grew up in church or if you went to VBS when you were a kid, you're hearing that and you're like, I've heard that verse somewhere, right? It's kind of repeated throughout the Bible. It is. We know that this was a supremely important part of the book of Deuteronomy because it became, at this point, a prayer for the Hebrew people that they repeated twice a day. They repeated the Shema twice a day. It was that important. So why would they do that? It's because a faithful response to God's word can be summed up in the two main words of these verses. The first word, we could translate it either way, hear or listen. But this word means more than just like passively listen. It includes the idea of responding to what you hear. If the person saying it is real, that is God, not Moses, and that is God, not me, then careful attention to respond, to listen and respond to these words indicate that you have truly heard. If you don't respond, you haven't heard it. Wouldn't that make our invitations a lot more interesting, right? You have to somehow log your response to the message before you are allowed to leave. That's a little too prison cultish, kind of. So we're not doing that. But that's the evidence of truly listening. You haven't really heard until you have heard and responded. You may get tired of hearing me talk about how important the Bible is to the Christian life, but oh well. To read it, to study it, to memorize it, to meditate on it, listen to the Word, and then respond to the Word on a daily basis. Hear the Word and then heed the Word would be a way that you could think about that. But there's more. The second key word of this verse is love. The kind of response that characterizes true and authentic listening to the Word is to love the Lord with all of our heart and soul and might. Love is the true motivation for obeying the law of God. Obedience without the motivation for love is not what the Lord is ultimately after. Throughout the entire book of Deuteronomy, there is a tight connection between loving and listening. And the implication is clear for Israel and for us. If we seek to listen and to love God daily, we will fulfill the original promise God gave to the family of Abraham, to show everyone around us the wisdom and justice of God, and thus become a blessing to them. And so what do we see here, just by way of application? First of all, we see that worship brings life. Worship brings life. You are a worshiper of something or someone. If you're not intentional about who you worship, you will worship anything other than the God that created you. But if you want life, according to God's design, then worship God. That's the message of Deuteronomy. This is seen in Israel's worship as contrasted to the pagan worship of the people of Canaan. Many of the laws that perplex people in Leviticus and Deuteronomy are given to enable Israel to stand apart from the other nations. The false worship of the nations degrade, objectify, and victimize other human beings made in God's image. Idolatry harms you. It harms people around you. As true worship of God takes place in your life, the result is life and purpose and the beauty of God's original design as it shines through you as you worship Him. And so in one sense, we go back to where we began, just let what's on the inside come out. Cultivate gratitude. Fix your eyes. It sounds a lot like Romans 12:1, right? Therefore, brothers, in view of God's mercies, offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God. This is your spiritual act of worship or your reasonable act of service. The reasons that you should offer yourself fully and wholly to God is because of what He's done for you in Jesus. And so you say, I'm just not feeling it today. I'm just not feeling all of this. Well, first of all, in one sense, nobody cares about your feelings. Okay? Sorry. We're not really going for a feeling. I mean, the music, it may cultivate some emotional responses, right? Because that's God's design for music, right? But that's not ultimately what we're aiming for. What we're aiming for is you to embrace truth in such a way that it cultivates gratitude and joy and hope and peace as you hear about the God who loves you so much that he sent his one and only Son, Jesus, to die for you. And as you put your faith in his finished work and he plants his Holy Spirit inside of you, then that cultivates a response of love back towards him. And that loving response not only honors him and delights him, but it turns you into a change agent where you are today. That's why our mission statement here at Agape is worship God, starts with worship, love people, results in loving people, make disciples, because that's how you can best love people, and make a difference. Because we believe God's equipped you as a Christian to make a difference where you are. Idolatry results in victimization of people around you. Worship of the one true God results in life flowing from you and you becoming a change agent where you are. But we also see the heart of the problem. At the very beginning of Deuteronomy 30, Moses says something odd. He's told them that they will go in and possess the land, that they would see God do amazing things. But he also tells them, and this is the weird part, he tells them that they would ultimately rebel. And so Moses in Deuteronomy is saying, hey, I don't want you to be faithless like your parents' generation, but I have to say, you're probably going to be faithless. You're probably going to rebel. And he wasn't speaking something into them that he was hoping they would do. He just recognizes that after walking with these people for 40 years in the wilderness, that something is wrong with the human heart. He's seen it in himself, right? Moses is a murderer. He's seen the deepest, darkest blackness of the human heart. And he knows it's not just isolated in him. The seeds are in every one of the Israelites that are listening to his voice. You see, according to Moses, the problem is that we can hear, but we don't truly heed. We can listen, but we don't truly respond. We don't really love God with our whole hearts like God has called us to. And therein lies the problem. It is a problem of the heart. The adage that is popular still in American culture today is follow your heart. Follow your heart. It's one of the most awful heresies that's ever come out of American theology. The problem that we've seen and will continue to see in Israel, the reason that Moses sees that their unfaithfulness is certain is because we follow our hearts too much. This has been the root of the problem throughout the entire Old Testament so far. This is the problem that plagues the human race. Adam and Eve followed their heart. Cain followed his heart. The people of Noah's day followed their hearts. Sodom and Gomorrah followed their hearts. The generation that died in the wilderness followed their hearts. And they all proved the truth of Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. In fact, what we're going to see next week, or 2 weeks from now, as we get into the book of Judges, Judges chapter 21, verse 25. The book of Judges ends with, everyone did what was right in his own eyes, or to put it using the vernacular that we've already established, everyone was following their own heart. Proverbs 14:12 says, there's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end its way is death. When you follow your heart, you set yourself up to be an idolater of self, of somebody else, of money, of work, of fame, of pleasure. And not only are you becoming something and choosing something that will harm the people around you, but you are committing one of the ultimate forms of self-harm. You're killing yourself as you worship anything or anyone other than God. And so Moses foretells us of a day that the later prophets such as Jeremiah and Ezekiel also spoke of, a day when the Lord our God would change our hearts in such a way that we would, Deuteronomy chapter 30 verse 6 says, love the Lord our God with all of our hearts and live. And that is the promise, church, of the gospel today, is that you can't break the chains of idolatry in your life on your own. So, I want to tell you how much I love you, okay? And I knew today would be special. And so, I did a college event in Auburn this weekend. And it's something I do every year. It's an awesome privilege. It's like a disciple now for college students in homes. And so, to show you how sanctified my wife is, I left on Friday. Remember what Friday was? Valentine's Day? Yeah. I told the kids, I was like, I'm going to need some Pentecostal, like, resurrection experiences to, like, help my wife see that this was like, hey, it's a good choice, you know. That didn't happen. It was a really awesome weekend, though. And my wife was great in letting me escape on Valentine's Day. And so I go down and did sessions with these kids in this home on Friday and Saturday, and then last session last night, and I got up at 3:00 this morning and beat the weather out of Auburn and made it back. So it's like mentally, I'm mid-afternoon right now, right? Just so you know. So if I get crazy, I told you, Crazy Ryan comes out after Sunday afternoon, and so but the verse of the weekend was Luke 9:23. If anyone would come after me, it's Jesus talking, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. Right? And it was really one of the really awesome things to do with these college students was because they're college students, right? And so like it's fun because it's different than this environment. This environment, I want to be as clear of a communicator as I can with a little bit of humor, a lot of truth, right? But in there, it's like you just ask hard questions and then sit in silence and wait for them to wrestle with it, right? It's awesome. I love it, right? And so the first question we asked, I was like, do your choices matter? Because we just talked about God's sovereignty. All these kids believe that God is sovereign, yeah, right? But I'm like, okay, do your choices matter? And so we do what we do, and we catalog creation, fall, redemption, and restoration. Y'all have heard that before, right? So we started at creation, and I was like, what two trees were present in the garden? Tree of life, tree of knowledge of good and evil, and there were a lot more trees, but those are the two that were named, right? And so the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was the subject of the command given to Adam and Eve, don't eat. It represents there in the beginning this big little word. It's the same word that Jesus began his statement in Luke 9:23 with. If. If. Like I said, it's a little word, it's 2 letters, but it's huge. Because for them this weekend, it was if they would follow Jesus and be his disciple. But for you here today, it's if you will stop being an idolater. If you will become a sold-out, surrendered worshiper of the one true God. The question of if has not gone away. The reality of choice is still present. And a lot of Christians, like when we get to this time of invitation, you're just like, all right, well, let's close it up. Let's go to lunch. But if that was our view of the invitation, we'd just really stop doing one. And I'd just say, hey, if you have more questions, I'll be right back there. Right? And I wouldn't pose the if to everybody. But the reason we pose the if to everybody is because this invitation is really not as much for unbelievers who need to trust in Jesus as their Savior and follow him as a disciple or be baptized or anything like that. It's for believers who have to recognize that their hearts are still an idol-making factory. And that idolatry is harming you. It's harming the people around you. And maybe your half-heartedness about worshiping the one true God, where you are, and taking captive that moment is really the if that you need to be faced with. It's the if that I need to be faced with. And so the way, this is the whole reason I mention this, the way to stop being an idolater is not just to stop being an idolater, because I said earlier, you were created to be a worshiper, and you will worship. You will. Every day, every moment, you will worship. And so the way to stop being an idolater is to follow Jesus and worship Him. And take captive every moment where you are, every moment with your kids and your grandkids, every moment at work, every moment leading up to bedtime, every moment once you wake up, right? Because you can't really take captive that moments where you have to be unconscious for a certain amount of hours per night, right? You can't really take that captive. And so we just trust that to the Lord, and when we wake up, we say every moment of every day, God, that's what you're worthy of in my life. But it's not just about what you're worthy of at this point. It's about the fact that I've got people around me who are lost and who are broken and who are hurting, and I care enough to stand in their way of them going to hell. You cannot divorce worship and evangelism. You cannot divorce worship and shining your light for Jesus wherever you go. And so, church, the question of if is not just before some college students who we would look at them and say, you got the most awesome years of your life before you, right? The question of if is for you because God's given you life today, and that's precious. And if God gives you life tomorrow, who are you going to live it for? That's the if in front of you today. It's a big if, isn't it? It's a big decision. And just like we've seen with Israel, I'll stop after this. Just like we've seen with Israel, guess what? God's going to honor the choice you make. He's going to honor the choice that you make. If you don't want to get real with Him, okay. Stay there, but you know the consequences. But if you want to become a worshiper, get ready for life. And a life that doesn't just stop with you, because it overflows into the people around you. And I don't know about you, that's the legacy I want to leave. But it starts with the if that you see and respond to today. Let's pray.